My name is Amber. I am 33 years old and the CEO of a rapidly growing cybersecurity firm based in Manhattan. Building my company from the ground up required relentless dedication, countless sleepless nights, and an ironclad will. My firm recently expanded into the Asian market, which is exactly why I found myself on a grueling 20-hour flight from Tokyo back to the United States. I had negotiated fiercely to wrap up my meetings early just so I could make it back in time for my younger sister Brittany's wedding. Brittany is 29 years old and has always been the undisputed golden child of our family. Growing up in a status-obsessed household in upstate New York, my parents Brenda and Thomas made it abundantly clear that Brittany's happiness was the only thing that mattered. The Uber tires crunched over the pristine white gravel of the historic Newport, Rhode Island estate. It was a breathtaking waterfront property, the kind of venue that demanded a massive deposit and an exclusive guest list. I stepped out of the vehicle, dragging my carry-on suitcase with one hand while adjusting my dress with the other. I was wearing a stunning custom-tailored bridesmaid gown that cost me $2,000 out of my own pocket. Brittany had sent me a color swatch months ago with strict instructions to match the exact shade of midnight blue. Despite the jet lag settling deep into my bones, I felt a genuine sense of duty to be there. I walked up the grand stone steps toward the heavy oak doors, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of celebration and music. Instead, I found my mother and father standing on the landing like a pair of hostile sentinels. Brenda wore an elaborate designer gown that looked brand new, her hair perfectly coiffed. Thomas stood beside her in a sharp tuxedo, his jaw tight. I offered a tired but genuine smile, reaching out to hug my mother. She stepped back, raising her hand to physically block my path. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. "Leave right now," Brenda commanded, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the guests inside would not hear. "Only real family is allowed inside, and you were definitely not invited." I froze, my hand still resting on the handle of my suitcase. I stared at them, trying to process the sheer cruelty of her words. I asked what she meant, reminding them that I was Brittany's sister and I had just flown across the world to be here. Thomas stepped forward, his face flushed with irritation. He signaled to a pair of event security guards standing near the entrance, motioning for them to edge closer. "We cannot risk you embarrassing Brittany in front of DeAndre's family," Thomas sneered. DeAndre is Brittany's new husband. He is a brilliant, highly respected African-American cardiologist from a wealthy, tight-knit family. His relatives are deeply principled, honest people. My parents were obsessed with impressing them. "You always ruin everything," Thomas continued, his voice dripping with venom. "Just like when you turned 18 and selfishly refused to hand over your academic scholarship money so Brittany could join her elite college sorority. We are not letting your negative energy destroy the most important day of your sister's life. Get off this property before I have security throw you out." There was a time in my life when those words would have shattered me. A time when I would have begged for their approval, cried in the driveway, and asked what I had done to deserve such vicious rejection. But I was no longer that scared teenager trying to buy her parents' love. I was a successful woman who fought for every ounce of power she held. I looked at Brenda's smug face and Thomas's aggressive posture. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked them dead in the eye, turned around, and walked back down the stone steps. I ordered a black car service to take me directly back to Manhattan. The long drive down the coast gave me hours to think. I accepted the reality that my family was entirely broken, and that my role as the scapegoat was permanent in their eyes. I resolved to cut contact completely and focus on the life I had built. I returned to my penthouse apartment, hung the $2,000 dress in the back of my closet, and went straight to sleep. 2 days later, I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing security protocols for a new corporate client. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID showed Brenda's name. Against my better judgment, I answered, expecting a fake apology, or perhaps a demand that I send a belated wedding gift. I could not have been more wrong. Amber, Brenda began skipping any greeting. "The total final bill for the wedding is $138,000. I need to know if you are planning to pay it via wire transfer or if we need to split it across a few of your credit cards. I stopped typing. The sheer audacity of the question was staggering. I asked Brenda to repeat herself, genuinely believing I had misheard her. Her voice took on that familiar tone of chilling entitlement. She slowly repeated that the wedding cost $138,000 and demanded to know my payment method. I firmly reminded her that she had physically banned me from the venue 2 days prior, telling me I was not family. I stated clearly that I would not be paying a single cent toward a wedding I was explicitly forbidden from attending. Brenda let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "It is not a request, Amber. It is your duty as the older sister to provide for this family. We already took care of the logistics. We used your social security number to secure the vendor lines of credit. You are legally responsible for the debt now. If you refuse to pay it, the vendors will send it to collections, and your perfect credit score will be completely destroyed. Think about how that will look for your fancy business." The silence in my office was absolute. My own parents had stolen my identity to fund a 6-figure party for the golden child. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have cried or started yelling threats through the phone. But my parents had severely underestimated who they were dealing with. My cybersecurity instincts immediately took over. I did not argue. I laughed a cold, hollow laugh that made Brenda gasp slightly on the other end of the line, and then I hung up the phone. I dropped my phone and cracked my knuckles. Brenda thought she could terrify me with threats of collections agencies. She assumed I was still the defenseless teenager who used to hide while she hurled insults. She had absolutely no idea that she had just challenged a cybersecurity executive to a digital war. I swiveled my chair and woke my secure terminal. The monitors glowed to life, illuminating the dark office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I did not waste time shedding tears over a mother who viewed me strictly as a walking ATM. I needed hard data. I bypassed the standard credit portals. Using proprietary firm software, I ran a deep sweep on my social security number. The initial report populated on my left monitor within seconds. My jaw tightened as I scrolled through the summary. My pristine credit score plummeted. 4 massive hard inquiries had been authorized over the past 90 days. They were all linked to a major financial institution that specialized in high-risk event financing and luxury personal loans. Brenda and Thomas had not simply opened a credit card. They had orchestrated a highly coordinated financial takeover of my identity. I pulled the detailed transaction logs and began isolating the digital metadata attached to each application. Every action on the internet leaves a breadcrumb. Brenda and Thomas were arrogant enough to believe that clicking a box on a screen made them untraceable ghosts. I initiated a trace routine on the electronic signatures used to approve the loans. The data packets flowed across my screen in strings of alphanumeric code. I isolated the origin IP addresses for the initial loan application, the secondary vendor approvals, and the final signature confirmations. They did not even try to mask their location. They had not routed their connection through a virtual private network or used a public server. Every single IP address pointed directly to the residential internet router installed at my parents' sprawling suburban estate in upstate New York. I cross-referenced the device identifier and confirmed it was the exact desktop computer sitting in the home office of Thomas. Their sheer laziness was offensive. They committed federal identity theft from the comfort of their living room. I dug further into the application files. I found the contact information they had submitted to the bank. They had created a burner email address using a variation of my middle name and birth year. They intercepted the verification calls by listing the secondary cell phone number of Brenda as my primary contact. They had systematically built a shadow profile of me entirely controlled by them, designed to funnel massive amounts of debt into my name while keeping me completely in the dark. I leaned closer to the monitor and opened the itemized disbursements. I wanted to see exactly how they had spent $138,000 of my stolen money. The entitlement was sickening. There was a $45,000 wire transfer to the historic Newport Estate venue, where I had been barred from entering just 2 days ago. There was a $30,000 charge to an elite organic catering company. There was a $20,000 payment to a luxury floral designer known for importing rare orchids. My parents had spared absolutely no expense for Brittany. They had handed the golden child the wedding of the century on a silver platter entirely funded by the daughter they despised. I remembered how Thomas had refused to co-sign a tiny student loan for me when I was 18. He had told me that taking on debt was for fools and that I needed to learn the harsh realities of the real world. Now he was leveraging my hard-earned financial stability to pay for the towering ice sculptures and imported champagne for Brittany. I kept scrolling through the approved credit lines, archiving every piece of evidence into an encrypted vault on my local server. I needed this digital paper trail to be absolutely bulletproof. As I reached the bottom of the transaction log, a severe discrepancy caught my eye. The wedding vendors accounted for roughly $98,000 of the stolen funds, but the total debt registered on my credit report was significantly higher. I ran a filtering script to isolate the remaining balance. The system highlighted a separate line of credit approved just 2 weeks before the wedding. It had nothing to do with bridal gowns, floral arrangements, or catering companies. My eyes narrowed as I read the merchant identifier. It was a luxury automotive dealership located just 10 miles from my parents' house. I pulled the specific loan document and cracked the encrypted PDF. The digital ink displayed a $40,000 down payment authorization. I quickly ran a public records search through the State Department of Motor Vehicles database, cross-referencing the name and address of my father. The result popped up instantly. Thomas had registered a brand new luxury SUV in his own name exactly 14 days ago. The breath hitched in my throat as the magnitude of their depravity truly set in. My parents had not just stolen my identity to give Brittany her dream wedding. They had used my stolen identity to buy themselves a luxury vehicle. They viewed me as an endless financial resource to be exploited, totally lacking any moral compass or basic human decency. They were driving around their upscale neighborhood in a premium SUV, waving at their wealthy friends, all while knowing they had chained me to a mountain of fraudulent debt. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting off my face. They wanted to play games with my livelihood. They wanted to destroy my financial future to fund their vanity. I was going to make sure they lost everything. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number for Nathaniel. I was ready to burn their empire to ash. I was sitting in Nathaniel's sleek, glass-walled conference room less than an hour later. Nathaniel is a legal shark. He is the kind of man who destroys hostile corporate takeovers before breakfast, a man who views the law not as a shield, but as a scalpel. I slid my encrypted tablet across the polished mahogany table and authorized his access. He scrolled through the files I had compiled. He saw the IP logs, the forged electronic signatures, the burner email accounts, and the final confirmation of the $40,000 luxury SUV registered to Thomas. Nathaniel usually maintains an expression of pure, unreadable stone, but as he absorbed the sheer scale of the identity theft committed by my own parents, his jaw visibly tightened. He read through the itemized wedding charges, shaking his head at the audacity of the floral budget alone. He looked up from the screen, took off his glasses, and gave me his professional recommendation. He told me we needed to freeze my credit immediately. He drafted a rapid response plan to call the Manhattan police file a localized identity theft report and aggressively dispute the charges with the vendor financing institution. He assured me that with the IP logs pointing directly to upstate New York, I would not be held liable for a single dime. The banks would write it off as fraud, and my parents would likely face a local grand larceny charge. Nathaniel explained that with their suburban connections and Thomas's ability to hire a slick local defense attorney, they would likely spin this as a misunderstood family loan. They would get a slap on the wrist, maybe a few months of probation, and a stern warning. I listened to him lay out the standard defensive playbook, shaking my head before he even finished his sentence. I told him absolutely not. I did not want a localized police report. I did not want my parents bargaining their way down to a simple domestic dispute. If we froze the accounts right now, the vendors would panic, the bank would stop the transfer of funds, and Brenda and Thomas would instantly play the victim. They would cry to their friends that I had given them verbal permission to use my credit, and then maliciously revoked it at the last second just to ruin Brittany's wedding. They had spent my entire life twisting the narrative to make me the villain. I refused to give them the ammunition to do it again. I leaned across the table and told Nathaniel my exact terms. We were going to do nothing. We were going to let every single transaction clear. We were going to let the bank transfer the $98,000 to the wedding venue, the florist, and the caterer. We were going to let the luxury car dealership cash the $40,000 check for my father's new SUV. Nathaniel stared at me, warning me that allowing the funds to clear made the financial damage very real and incredibly difficult to unwind. He cautioned that I was putting my own company's pristine financial standing at temporary risk. I told him that was exactly the point. By letting the money move across state lines from the corporate bank to the Rhode Island vendors and the New York dealership, they were no longer just committing simple fraud. They were executing federal wire fraud. By using my social security number to facilitate those transfers, they were committing aggravated identity theft. These were federal crimes with mandatory minimum prison sentences. If we stopped the money now, it was merely an attempted crime. If we let the money land in the vendors' accounts, the crime was fully executed and the digital paper trail became permanently cemented in the federal banking system. Nathaniel sat back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He understood exactly what I was doing. I was not just building a defense to save my credit score. I was building an inescapable federal indictment. He agreed to draft the necessary affidavits to hold in escrow ready to be deployed the second I gave the green light. He told me to keep monitoring the IP traffic from their router, just in case they tried to open any more accounts, but otherwise we would play the waiting game. I left his office feeling a dangerous sense of calm. For 33 years, Brenda and Thomas had controlled my life through emotional manipulation and financial threats. They had banned me from my sister's wedding to protect their precious image. Now they had handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle that image completely. I spent the next 24 hours in my apartment watching the secure server logs. I watched the notifications roll in as the vendor payment successfully posted. I watched the luxury car loan status change from pending to active. The money was gone. The crimes were complete. My parents were officially celebrating their successful theft, completely unaware that I held the detonator to their newly financed lives. I was pouring myself a cup of black coffee on Saturday morning, finalizing my plan to submit the evidence binder to the FBI Financial Crimes Division on Monday. My personal phone chimed on the kitchen counter. It was a text message from a number I had only saved a few months prior. It was DeAndre Brittany's new husband. I opened the message expecting a formal thank you note for a wedding gift I never sent. Instead, the text read entirely differently. Hey, Amber. We really missed you at the ceremony. Brittany said your flight from Tokyo got grounded and you were stuck in transit. We are having a formal gift opening brunch at your parents' house tomorrow morning. It would mean the world to us if you could make it. I stared at the glowing screen. DeAndre had absolutely no idea. He did not know I had been standing on the steps of the venue. He did not know my parents had banned me. Brittany had lied to his face to cover up their cruelty, spinning a fake story about a delayed flight to hide her family's toxic reality from her new principled husband. And in doing so, DeAndre was unwittingly handing me the perfect invitation to walk right through their front door. Sunday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and brilliant sunshine. I selected my outfit with military precision. I wore a tailored ivory pantsuit that projected absolute authority and quiet wealth, paired with minimal jewelry and a sharp, clean blowout. I was not showing up to my parents' house as the rejected, heartbroken daughter. I was arriving as the executioner. The drive from Manhattan to upstate New York took exactly 2 hours. I pulled my sleek sports car into the long, circular driveway of my parents' suburban estate just as the catered brunch was hitting its peak. High-end luxury vehicles lined the street belonging to DeAndre's affluent family members and my parents' country club friends. A uniformed valet offered to take my keys, but I waved him off and parked near the exit. I wanted a clear path out when the dust settled. I walked up the winding brick path, the sounds of classical string music and clinking champagne flutes drifting through the crisp air. The front door was wide open to welcome guests. I stepped over the threshold and paused in the grand foyer, taking in the scene. The living room was transformed into a sickening display of excess. Massive arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas covered every surface, likely paid for by my stolen credit. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of mimosas and gourmet pastries. In the center of the room sat a mountain of silver and gold-wrapped wedding gifts. Brenda was the first to spot me. She was standing near the fireplace, holding a crystal champagne flute and laughing with a group of older women. The moment her eyes locked onto mine, the laugh died in her throat. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a chalk statue. The crystal flute in her hand trembled so violently that champagne sloshed over the rim and onto her designer silk blouse. Thomas noticed his wife staring and followed her gaze. His reaction was even more satisfying. He choked on his drink, his face turning an unnatural shade of crimson. I could see the absolute terror flashing in their eyes. They thought I had come to scream, to cry, or to drag the police through their front door. They were trapped. They could not cause a scene or throw me out without exposing themselves as monsters in front of the wealthy in-laws they were so desperate to impress. I maintained a perfectly serene smile and glided smoothly into the living room. Before Brenda or Thomas could intercept me, a tall, handsome man with a warm, genuine smile broke away from the crowd. It was DeAndre. He wore a sharp casual blazer and looked genuinely thrilled to see me. "Amber," he called out, navigating through the sea of guests to pull me into a tight, welcoming hug. "You made it. I am so glad you are here. We missed you at the ceremony. Brittany told me your flight from Japan was grounded. I was worried you would not be able to get back in time for the brunch either." I hugged him back, feeling a sudden sharp pang of pity for this incredibly decent man. He was completely oblivious to the toxic wasteland he had just married into. "I would not have missed this for the world, DeAndre," I replied smoothly, my voice carrying just enough volume for my parents to hear. "I am so sorry about the wedding. Travel can be so unpredictable, but I am here now to celebrate with the family." DeAndre beamed and immediately took my arm, guiding me toward a group of sharply dressed people near the gift pile. He introduced me to his parents, his sister, and a few of his colleagues. They were warm, intelligent people who welcomed me instantly. I engaged them in polite conversation about my cybersecurity firm and my recent trip to Tokyo. I played the part of the successful, supportive older sister flawlessly. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched my parents agonizing over their inability to intervene. Brenda was practically hyperventilating near the dessert station. Thomas was gripping the edge of a mahogany table so hard his knuckles were white. They had to stand there and watch me charm their new highly prized in-laws, utterly terrified of what I might say next. Every time I laughed or smiled at a joke DeAndre made, Thomas flinched, bracing for the impact of a public exposure. I let them sweat for a full 20 minutes. I sipped sparkling water, complimented DeAndre's mother on her beautiful dress, and casually mentioned how stunning the floral arrangements were, noting how expensive they must have been. I caught Brenda's eye as I said it, raising an eyebrow. She looked like she was going to faint. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, but the facade held. That is until Brittany finally descended the grand staircase. She wore a white silk bridal robe, her hair cascading in perfect pageant curls. She paused on the landing, expecting a round of applause from her adoring audience. Instead, she saw DeAndre standing with his arm casually slung around my shoulders, laughing at a story I had just told. Brittany's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed into predatory slits. The golden child could never handle anyone else holding the spotlight, especially not the sister she had spent her entire life stepping on. She quickly masked her fury with a wide, fake smile and practically sprinted down the remaining stairs. "Amber," she squealed, her voice unnaturally high. She rushed over and threw her arms around me in a crushing, utterly fake embrace. "You are here. I am just so surprised." I patted her back lightly. "I received DeAndre's text. I told you I would try my absolute best to make it, Brittany." DeAndre smiled at his new bride. I am so glad she made it. We were just talking about her company's expansion into Asia. It is fascinating stuff. Brittany's jaw clenched. She hated my company. She hated that I had built something she could never match with her influencer aesthetic. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin through my jacket. DeAndre, honey, your parents were looking for you near the patio, Brittany said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I need to steal my big sister for just a second. We have some family catch-up to do. DeAndre nodded, completely unaware of the hostility radiating from his wife. Take your time. I will go check on my folks. The second DeAndre was out of earshot, Brittany's smile dropped completely. Her grip on my arm tightened as she yanked me away from the crowd and forcefully pulled me down the hallway toward the massive catering kitchen. The kitchen was currently empty, the staff having moved out to the patio to serve the hot food. The heavy swinging doors closed behind us, cutting off the classical music and the cheerful chatter. We were alone. The sweet, blushing bride routine vanished, instantly replaced by the vicious, entitled bully I had known my entire life. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with absolute contempt, preparing to launch a brutal attack. What are you actually doing here, Amber? Brittany hissed, dropping her voice to a venomous whisper so the caterers outside would not hear. You have a lot of nerve showing your face after Mom and Dad specifically told you to stay away. I leaned against the stainless steel prep counter, crossing my ankles. I am attending your brunch, Brittany. DeAndre invited me. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. Brittany scoffed, rolling her eyes as she paced across the pristine white tiles. DeAndre is too nice for his own good. He does not know how toxic you are. He does not know how you ruin every family event with your negative energy and your constant need to make everything about your stupid company. Mom and Dad banned you for my protection. I deserved one day where I did not have to deal with your bitter, jealous attitude. I watched her perform. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. For years she had spun this exact narrative. If I succeeded, I was arrogant. If I stayed quiet, I was plotting. If I objected to their mistreatment, I was ruining the family dynamic. She actually believed her own lies. She honestly thought banning her sister from her wedding was an act of self-defense rather than an act of profound cruelty. You told DeAndre my flight from Tokyo was grounded, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. You lied to your new husband to cover up the fact that your parents hired security guards to physically bar me from the property. Does that sound like the behavior of a happy, secure bride? Brittany's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. I did what I had to do to protect my peace. You would have showed up looking miserable, bringing down the whole aesthetic of the venue. You never supported my relationship with DeAndre anyway. You are just mad because I found a wealthy, successful man, while you are going to die alone with your servers and your firewalls. She stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Her eyes rapidly filled with tears. She was forcing herself to cry, practicing the victim routine, just in case a stray caterer or a wandering guest walked through the swinging doors. The crocodile tears flowed effortlessly down her cheeks, perfectly preserving her expensive bridal makeup. You always do this, Amber. Brittany sobbed quietly, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. You always try to make me feel small. I just wanted my dream wedding. Why cannot you just be happy for me? Why do you have to poison everything you touch? I did not flinch. I did not offer a comforting hand. I did not take the bait and raise my voice. I just stared at her, analyzing her performance the same way I analyzed a phishing scam. It was designed to elicit an emotional response to trick the target into making a mistake. I remained a brick wall of silence. My lack of reaction unsettled her. The fake tears stopped as quickly as they had started. She swiped a hand under her eyes and dropped the act, her expression hardening back into a greedy sneer. Look, I do not have time to deal with your psychological games today, Brittany snapped, checking her reflection in the polished steel of the industrial refrigerator. DeAndre thinks you are here to drop off a gift and make peace. So let us just get this over with. Hand over the envelope. Make up some excuse about having a corporate emergency in the city and slip out the back door before you cause a scene. I will tell DeAndre you had to leave early. She held out her hand, palm up, waiting. She genuinely expected me to hand her a massive check. In her mind, I was the pathetic, desperate older sister who had shown up to buy her way back into the family's good graces. She assumed I felt guilty for missing the wedding. She thought I was going to hand her $5,000 or $10,000 just to earn a fake smile and a brief nod of approval. The sheer greed radiating from her was almost palpable. She did not care about my presence. She did not care about family reconciliation. She only cared about the financial payout she felt entitled to receive. I reached inside the breast pocket of my tailored blazer. Brittany's eyes locked onto my hand, practically vibrating with anticipation. I pulled out a thick, heavy, oversized manila envelope. It was sealed tight with red security tape. The weight of it suggested it was stuffed with cash, or perhaps a massive stack of high-yield bonds. Brittany's greedy smile returned, stretching from ear to ear. She eagerly reached out to snatch the package from my grip. I pulled it back just an inch, keeping it out of her reach. "Not so fast," I said softly. "What is your problem now?" Brittany whined, her fingers twitching. "Just give it to me. I need to get back to my guests." "This is a very special gift, Brittany," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, serious register. "I put a lot of thought into this. I arranged this exclusively for you and Thomas and Brenda, but it comes with one very specific condition." She let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms defensively. "Fine. What is the condition? Do you want a public thank you? Do you want me to announce to DeAndre's family that my big sister finally did something generous? I can do that if it strokes your ego." "No public announcements," I said, maintaining my serene composure. "My condition is much simpler. You are not allowed to open this in private. You must take this envelope back into the living room stand right next to your new husband and open it while he is watching." Brittany looked at me with deep suspicion. Her eyes darted down to the thick package and back up to my face. She was trying to calculate the angle, trying to figure out how this could possibly be a trap, but her greed was entirely blinding. She could not resist the physical weight of the envelope. She assumed it was a grand gesture, a massive financial contribution that she could brag about to her friends. "You are so weird," Amber, Brittany scoffed, snatching the envelope from my hand. It felt substantial in her grasp. She weighed it in her palms, her eyes gleaming with undisguised satisfaction. "Fine. I will open it in front of DeAndre. He will be thrilled to see that you finally decided to be a supportive sister. Now do us all a favor and leave before you ruin the mood." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the swinging kitchen doors. "I would not miss this for the world," I replied, offering her a cold, empty smile. "Lead the way, little sister." Brittany spun on her heel, her silk bridal robe flowing behind her as she pushed through the kitchen doors and marched back toward the crowded living room. She clutched the heavy envelope to her chest, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was holding a loaded bomb. She was carrying the exact mechanism of her own destruction, practically skipping toward her husband to show off her prize. I followed right behind her, my heart beating in a steady, controlled rhythm. The trap had closed. The digital paper trail I had secured the day before was sitting right inside that envelope. It was not a check. It was not a stack of cash. It was a formal, notarized banking notice regarding a frozen credit line, complete with the unredacted transaction logs, detailing the exact cost of her dream wedding. She was about to detonate her entire fake life right in front of the man she had sworn to love and honor. We pushed through the heavy wooden swinging doors and re-entered the bright, suffocating atmosphere of the living room. Brittany marched ahead of me with the absolute confidence of a monarch returning to her throne. She clutched the heavy envelope against her chest. She believed she had won. She believed she had extracted her toll. She believed she had beaten me again. She practically floated across the expensive Persian rugs, eager to show off her newly acquired prize to her husband. DeAndre was standing near the towering mountain of silver and gold wrapped wedding gifts. He held a plate of catered pastries and smiled brightly as we approached. He noticed the thick sealed envelope immediately. His genuine, wholesome curiosity was the perfect catalyst for the trap. He asked Brittany what I had given her, hoping for a touching display of sisterly affection. He expected a heartfelt letter. He expected a generous check. He expected a beautiful family moment. Brittany beamed at him, totally unaware of the cliff she was about to step off. She wanted an audience. She wanted DeAndre to witness my supposed financial submission. She dug her manicured acrylic nails under the heavy red security tape and ripped the flap open. The sound of the strong adhesive tearing cut through the ambient noise of the string quartet playing in the corner. She reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of stiff, formal parchment paper. It was not a personal letter. It was not a shiny corporate check. It was a multi-page document bearing the distinct, intimidating watermark of a major federal banking institution. I stood perfectly still and watched her eyes track across the top of the page. I watched her read the bold black ink. I watched her read the words, "Notice of frozen account." I watched her read the words, "Notice of fraudulent activity." I watched her read the staggering final balance of $178,000. Her eyes darted down to the itemized list of merchants. She saw the Newport Estate venue. She saw the elite organic catering company. She saw the luxury floral designer. She saw the $40,000 down payment to the luxury automotive dealership. And right below the merchant list, she saw the attached IP address logs, pointing directly to the router sitting in her father's home office. Her breathing stopped completely. The color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. The heavy parchment paper began to tremble violently in her hands. She was staring at a federal fraud notice. She was staring at her own digital footprint. She was staring at the end of her perfectly curated life. The sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from her was magnificent. She tried to swallow, but her throat worked frantically against nothing. "What is it, babe?" DeAndre asked, leaning in closer to get a look at the imposing documents. "Is everything okay?" Brittany flinched as if she had been burned. She violently folded the stiff paper, nearly tearing it in half. She crumpled the crisp edges and shoved the entire stack blindly into her white silk bridal purse. She snapped the gold clasp shut with a loud click. She could not look DeAndre in the eye. She stared at the floor, her chest heaving as she tried to force oxygen into her lungs. "It is just a bond," she stammered, her voice shrill and unnaturally high. "It is a municipal investment bond. It is a very boring financial gift for our future. Thank you, Amber. It is very generous." She forced a laugh that sounded exactly like breaking glass. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the strap of her purse with white knuckles to hide the tremors. DeAndre looked puzzled. He tilted his head slightly, clearly registering the massive shift in his wife's demeanor. He accepted her answer, but the confusion was evident in his furrowed brow. I smiled at DeAndre, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I am just so glad I could contribute to the celebration," I said softly. Weddings are astronomically expensive these days. The overhead costs alone are terrifying. I cannot even imagine the final bill for a weekend at that historic Newport venue. And those imported rare orchids must have cost an absolute fortune. Thomas and Brenda must be incredibly stressed carrying that kind of sudden massive debt just to fund a single weekend. I really hope they did not overextend their credit. DeAndre shook his head immediately. He looked at me with an expression of mild confusion. He told me I was mistaken. He told me Thomas did not use credit. He told me Thomas explicitly stated he despises debt and refuses to finance family events. Thomas told me he paid for the entire wedding in cash. DeAndre said, his voice steady but laced with sudden uncertainty. He bragged about liquidating a low-yield savings account to cover the venue and the vendors. He was very adamant about starting our marriage off without attaching any financial burdens to the family. He told me he wired the liquid funds directly from his own personal checking account. The discrepancy hung heavily in the air between us. DeAndre is a highly intelligent man. He was doing the math. He was processing my comment about debt against Thomas's boast about cash. He was looking at his wife, who was currently hyperventilating and refusing to make eye contact. He was seeing the cracks forming in the pristine facade of the family he had just married into. He was realizing that someone was lying to him. From across the expansive living room, Thomas was monitoring our interaction like a hawk. He had abandoned his conversation with his country club friends the moment he saw Brittany open the envelope. He saw the color leave his daughter's face. He saw her shove the papers into her purse like contraband. He saw the deep confusion settling over the face of his wealthy, principled son-in-law. He saw me standing there radiating absolute control. Thomas saw his lie unraveling in real time. The panic finally broke through Thomas's polished exterior. He practically shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of mimosas to cross the room. His face was a mask of barely contained fury. He reached our small circle and did not even bother offering a polite greeting. He grabbed my upper arm. His heavy fingers dug painfully into my bicep, pulling me slightly off balance. "Excuse us, DeAndre." Thomas growled, his voice tight and breathless. "Amber and I need to have a private conversation about a family matter right now." Before DeAndre could ask a single question or object to the aggressive physical contact, Thomas yanked me away from the gift table. He did not care who was watching anymore. He dragged me down the long corridor, away from the music and the guests, toward the heavy oak doors of his private study. He was leading me directly into the interrogation room, completely unaware that he had already lost the war. The heavy oak doors of the study slammed shut with a definitive echoing thud. Thomas shoved me forward, releasing my arm as if touching my jacket burned his skin. Brenda slipped through the doors a fraction of a second later, quickly turning the brass deadbolt lock to ensure no wandering guests could interrupt. The festive sounds of the string quartet and the clinking champagne flutes vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating, hostile silence. The study was Thomas in physical form: dark mahogany bookshelves, imposing leather furniture, and an oversized desk designed exclusively to make anyone standing on the opposite side feel small and insignificant. For my entire childhood, this room was the execution chamber. This was where I was summoned to be told I was not trying hard enough. This was where I was summoned to be told my grades were a disappointment. This was where I was summoned to be told I would never amount to anything without their money. They expected me to shrink into myself the moment the lock clicked. They expected the walls of the study to trigger my obedience. Thomas marched around to the back of his massive desk, planting his hands firmly on the polished wood. The veins in his neck pulsed against his stiff collar. He did not bother denying the fraud. He did not attempt to feign ignorance about the bank notices in Brittany's envelope. The facade of the happy, generous father completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calculating predator. "You listen to me very carefully, Amber," Thomas growled, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly register. "You are going to march back out there, tell DeAndre you gave your sister a very generous corporate bond, and then you are going to get in your car and drive back to the city. You are going to call your bank, and you are going to tell them those charges are fully authorized." I stood my ground in the center of the room, my hands resting casually in my jacket pockets. "You committed federal wire fraud, Thomas. You stole my identity to buy yourself a luxury vehicle and throw a party. The bank has the IP logs. They know the applications originated from your router. You left a digital trail a mile wide." Brenda stepped out of the shadows near the door, her face contorted into a vicious sneer. The terrified woman from the living room was gone. "You owed us that money, Amber," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You owed us for the private schools. You owed us for the connections. You owed us for breathing the air in this house. We raised you. We put up with your endless, arrogant attitude. You make millions playing on your computers, and you refuse to share the wealth with the family that built you. We simply took what we were entitled to take." Their entitlement was breathtaking. They felt no remorse. They felt no guilt. They only felt rage that they had been caught. Thomas slammed his fist against the desk, demanding my attention. "The banks will not care about your little IP logs when we are done with you," he threatened, leaning over the mahogany surface. "You think you hold all the cards because you found the trail, but you forgot how the real world works. You forgot that reputation is everything." He stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs, his confidence returning in a sickening wave. "If you do not authorize those charges by tomorrow morning, Brenda and I are going to war. We know exactly who your biggest corporate clients are. We know the names of the board members at the venture capital firms backing your cybersecurity company. We will launch a public smear campaign so devastating you will never recover." Brenda smiled, a tight, wicked expression that made her look truly demonic. "We will go to the media, Amber. We will go to LinkedIn. We will tell your entire professional network that you are a financially abusive, unstable daughter. We will tell them you try to control us with your wealth, that you abandoned your aging parents, and that you are trying to ruin your sister's marriage out of pure malicious jealousy." Thomas picked up the thread, his voice dripping with poisonous certainty. "We will say you authorized those charges as a gift and then maliciously reported them as fraud just to watch your own family suffer. Who do you think your investors will believe? A cold, ruthless tech executive known for her cutthroat business tactics, or a weeping, devastated mother begging for her daughter to stop abusing the family?" I watched him pace the length of his desk. I watched him map out the destruction of my livelihood. I watched him weaponize my own mother's tears. They were absolutely right about one thing. A public scandal involving elder abuse and financial manipulation would trigger immediate morality clauses in my contracts. My corporate clients would flee to avoid the bad PR. My board of directors would force me to step down pending an investigation. My parents were fully prepared to burn my entire life to the ground just to avoid paying for their own vanity. "We will call your investors," Thomas sneered. "We will call your board. We will call the media. We will not stop until your name is poison in Manhattan. All you have to do to make this go away is walk out that door, keep your mouth shut, and pay the bill. It is a small price to pay to keep your empire intact." The silence stretched between us. They waited for the panic to set in. They waited for me to break. They waited for the moment I realized I was trapped in their web of psychological warfare. Instead, I let out a slow, defeated sigh. I allowed my shoulders to slump slightly, breaking my perfect posture. I looked down at the floor, projecting total submission. "You win," I said quietly, letting my voice sound small and fractured. "I will not fight it. I will call the bank on Monday and authorize the transfers. Just do not contact my board." Brenda let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. "I knew you would see reason once you remembered who was really in charge here. Now get out of my house." I nodded without making eye contact. Thomas unlocked the heavy oak doors, stepping aside to let me pass. I walked down the corridor, keeping my head bowed. I did not look at the guests in the living room. I did not look at DeAndre. I did not look at Brittany, who was standing near the front door, clutching her white silk purse with a terrified grip. I walked out into this crisp autumn air and down the brick path to my sports car. I slid into the driver's seat, closing the heavy door and sealing myself inside the soundproof cabin. I started the engine, the low hum vibrating through the steering wheel. Then I raised my left wrist. I tapped the face of my smartwatch twice. The tiny red recording icon vanished, replaced by a green checkmark, indicating the file had been successfully saved and uploaded to my encrypted cloud server. I had just recorded 30 minutes of high-definition crystal-clear audio of Brenda and Thomas confessing to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and felony extortion. The trap was locked. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of highway lights and steady breathing. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I simply drove, my mind already running through the sequence of events that would unfold over the next 48 hours. Thomas and Brenda thought they had won. They genuinely believed my silence in that study was absolute submission. But narcissists are fundamentally predictable. Their arrogance always outpaces their intelligence. I knew they would not be satisfied with simply keeping the stolen money. They needed to guarantee my absolute compliance. They needed to destroy my credibility so thoroughly that if I ever tried to report the fraud, no one would believe me. By Monday morning, their preemptive strike began. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the quarter's security audits when my phone vibrated so aggressively it nearly rattled off the glass surface. It was Marcus, my lead PR director. Before I could even offer a greeting, he was already shouting through the speaker. "Amber, you need to open Instagram right now." I pulled up the app and did not even have to search. Brenda's face was already dominating my feed. She had uploaded a heavily edited, highly produced 10-minute video. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Brenda sat on the plush sofa in her pristine living room, wearing a modest cardigan and absolutely no makeup. She looked frail, exhausted, and utterly devastated. Brittany sat next to her, clutching a crumpled tissue. her eyes red-rimmed and brimming with manufactured tears. The caption read, "A mother's heartbreak, how our daughter Amber destroyed my family." I hit play. Brenda's voice trembled with perfect cinematic timing. She looked directly into the camera lens and spun a web of catastrophic lies. She claimed I had used my cybersecurity expertise to hack into their personal accounts. She told her followers I had stolen their life savings out of petty jealousy over Brittany's wedding. She painted a picture of a wealthy, out-of-touch tech executive who derived sick pleasure from torturing her hardworking parents. Brittany chimed in right on cue, sobbing about how I had ruined her special day, how I had shown up uninvited just to mock their financial ruin, and how they were now facing bankruptcy because of my malicious hacking. They did not just post it to their friends. They had paid to boost the post. They had tagged major tech blogs, financial news outlets, and several of my company's highest-profile corporate clients. They were executing the exact smear campaign Thomas had threatened in the study. They wanted to strip away my reputation, my clients, and my company until I had absolutely nothing left. The internet devoured the story immediately. The public is always hungry for a villain, and a cold, calculating CEO terrorizing her weeping mother and beautiful younger sister was the perfect narrative. Within 3 hours, the video had crossed 1 million views. The comments were a toxic sludge of hatred. People were calling for my immediate resignation. They were demanding my company be investigated. They were tagging the police. My office door burst open. Marcus stood there looking pale and frantic, clutching a tablet displaying the rapidly plummeting sentiment metrics. "We have a massive crisis," Amber Marcus said, his voice rising in panic. "My team is drowning." The phones have not stopped ringing since the video went live. 3 of our largest enterprise clients just called, demanding an emergency meeting. The board of directors is scheduling an emergency vote for this afternoon. They are terrified. Financial fraud is the ultimate kiss of death in the cybersecurity sector. If our clients believe you are capable of hacking your own family, they will terminate our contracts immediately. He paced across the room, running a hand through his hair. "We need a response video right now. We need you to look at a camera, cry, and deny everything. We need to draft a press release claiming your mother is suffering from a mental break. We have to fight this in the court of public opinion before the board invokes the morality clause and forces you out." I watched him panic. I watched the metrics drop on his screen. I watched my mother's tearful, lying face looping endlessly on my monitor. The urge to fight back publicly was a brief, fleeting instinct. It is exactly what Brenda and Thomas expected me to do. They wanted a public mudslinging match. They wanted me to roll around in the dirt with them, trading accusations online until my professional reputation was entirely compromised. "I am not making a video, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. "You do not have a choice, Amber," Marcus pleaded, slamming his hands on my desk. "They are destroying your livelihood. If you do not defend yourself publicly, you will not have a company by Friday." I turned my chair to face my dual monitors. "I am not defending myself in the court of public opinion, Marcus. I deal in data. I deal in facts. I deal in permanent, irrefutable digital evidence." I ignored his frantic protests and opened my secure encrypted drive. I did not waste time drafting a PR statement. I did not waste time looking for a sympathetic journalist. Instead, I began assembling a digital package. I pulled the raw server logs showing the exact IP address and MAC address of the device that had initiated the fraudulent credit line. It was Thomas's personal desktop computer. I pulled the metadata from the electronic signatures, revealing the exact timestamps showing Brittany had signed the authorization documents from her own phone. Then I attached the crown jewel. I uploaded the pristine high-definition audio file I had recorded in the study. The file captured Thomas explicitly admitting to the fraud. It captured Brenda screaming that they were entitled to my money. It captured Thomas outlining his exact plan to extort me using this very smear campaign, threatening to ruin my company if I did not silently pay for Brittany's lavish wedding. I compressed the files into a single, heavily encrypted folder. I did not send it to a news outlet. I did not post a link on social media to clear my name. I opened my secure email client. I pulled up the direct encrypted contact address for a lead investigator at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Financial Crimes Division. It was a contact I had established years ago through my corporate security work. I attached the encrypted folder. I typed a brief formal summary detailing the identity theft, the wire fraud, and the felony extortion attempt. I bypassed the PR crisis entirely and clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox, slipping silently through the encrypted servers directly to Special Agent Miller's inbox. I closed the email client, minimized the window, and turned back to Marcus. The color had completely drained from his face. He was staring at me like I had just detonated a grenade in my own office. "You did not even draft a holding statement," Marcus whispered, his hands trembling as he clutched his tablet. "Amber, the media is going to eat us alive. The board is going to demand a public explanation by the end of the business day. You cannot just ignore a viral smear campaign that accuses you of felony theft against your own parents." I steepled my fingers, looking at him with absolute calm. "I am not ignoring it, Marcus. I am delegating it. Tell the board I am handling the situation internally and that any public comment right now would jeopardize an active federal investigation. Tell our corporate clients the exact same thing. We do not deny the allegations. We do not confirm them. We say absolutely nothing. Silence starves a fire. Let them scream into the void." Over the next 4 days, I ran my company as if my mother had not just painted me as a monster to millions of strangers on the internet. I led security audits. I attended pitch meetings. I reviewed quarterly projections. The PR crisis raged outside the reinforced glass walls of my office, but I refused to let it penetrate my focus. My complete lack of response drove the internet frenzy to a fever pitch, and then inevitably, it began to plateau. Without a counterattack to feed the algorithm, the outrage machine slowly ran out of fuel. While the digital world screamed, the silent, invisible gears of the federal justice system began to turn with terrifying efficiency. Special Agent Miller had opened my encrypted file within 10 minutes of receiving it. In the world of financial crimes, investigators are used to sifting through mountains of circumstantial evidence, ambiguous paper trails, and deniable hearsay. They rarely receive a perfectly wrapped package containing IP logs matching the suspect's home address device, metadata matching the suspect's daughter, and a high-definition audio recording of the suspects explicitly confessing to the entire scheme. It was not just a smoking gun, it was the whole armory. The FBI moved with a speed reserved for open and shut felony cases. They immediately contacted the fraud department of the federal bank holding the frozen credit line. The bank executives, terrified of regulatory blowback and eager to cooperate with federal agents, provided the remaining transaction histories. Every caterer, every florist, every luxury rental agency that had been paid with my stolen identity was subpoenaed. The paper trail was completely illuminated, tracing a direct, undeniable line from the Newport wedding venue straight to Thomas's mahogany desk. Completely oblivious to the impending storm, my family was busy taking victory laps on social media. I monitored their public pages from an anonymous burner account, watching them celebrate their perceived triumph. Brenda was posting daily updates, her tone shifting from devastated victim to brave survivor. She posted photos of herself drinking expensive wine on the patio, captioning them with inspirational quotes about removing toxic energy from your life and the healing power of family loyalty. She genuinely believed her 10-minute video had terrified me into total submission. Brittany was equally emboldened. She posted a constant stream of highly curated, heavily filtered photos from her lavish wedding. She showcased the imported orchids, the luxury getaway car, and the designer gown, completely unbothered by the fact that she was flaunting stolen goods. She believed she had successfully bullied her older sister into footing the bill. In her mind, the silence from my end meant the bank had been appeased. She thought the debt was magically erased, buried under the threat of bad PR. Thomas was the most arrogant of all. He was not active on social media, but his smugness bled through Brenda's posts. He was visible in the background of her photos, wearing his expensive golf polos, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He believed his brutal intimidation tactics in the study had worked perfectly. He thought he was a mastermind who had successfully outplayed a tech CEO. He thought he was untouchable. By Friday, the federal warrants had been signed by a judge. By Saturday, the coordination between the FBI's regional field office and local law enforcement was finalized. The trap had not just closed, it had been hermetically sealed. Sunday evening descended over their affluent, quiet suburban neighborhood. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple as the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. Inside the sprawling house, the atmosphere was festive and celebratory. Brenda and Thomas were hosting a lavish Sunday dinner to welcome Brittany and DeAndre back from their brief honeymoon. They were sitting in the formal dining room, surrounded by expensive crystal and heavy silver cutlery. Brenda was pouring generous glasses of a very expensive Merlot, laughing brightly at a joke DeAndre had just told. Thomas was carving a prime rib roast, slicing thick, juicy cuts while holding court at the head of the table. Brittany sat next to her new husband, glowing with unearned satisfaction, showing off her diamond ring under the warm light of the chandelier. They were safe. They were happy. They were completely insulated by their wealth and their arrogance. They believed the narrative they had spun to the world was now the permanent reality. Then it happened. It was not a polite ring of the doorbell. It was not a casual tap. It was a series of heavy, violent, booming knocks that seemed to shake the solid oak front door on its hinges. The aggressive, rhythmic pounding echoed down the grand hallway and slammed into the dining room, cutting off the laughter and shattering the comfortable ambiance. The heavy crystal wine glasses vibrated on the table. Thomas froze the carving knife suspended in the air over the roast. Brenda spilled a drop of dark red wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. Brittany jumped in her seat, her eyes darting toward the entryway. Only DeAndre looked confused rather than startled. The heavy knocking echoed again, louder this time, carrying the distinct, unmistakable rhythm of law enforcement demanding immediate entry. "Who on earth could that be at this hour?" Brenda muttered, her voice tight with annoyance, trying to recover her composure. She dabbed at the spilled wine with her napkin, her brow furrowed in irritation. Thomas set the carving knife down aggressively, wiping his hands on a linen napkin. He tossed the napkin onto the table and walked out of the dining room. His heavy footsteps thudded against the polished hardwood floor as he marched toward the grand foyer. He puffed out his chest, fully prepared to loudly berate whoever was daring to disturb his private family celebration. He reached out, grabbed the polished brass handle, and pulled the heavy door open, stepping directly into the blinding glare of high-powered tactical flashlights. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Step away from the door and keep your hands where I can see them." The voice was a sharp, booming command that sliced through the lingering smell of expensive roasted meat and aged wine. Thomas stumbled backward, throwing his hands up to instinctively shield his eyes from the blinding white light of the tactical flashbulbs. Half a dozen agents wearing dark Kevlar vests with the iconic yellow lettering filed into the grand foyer. Their heavy boots tracked dirt and melting snow across the pristine Italian marble tiles. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, instantly spreading out to secure the perimeter of the house. "What is the meaning of this?" Thomas bellowed, his shock instantly transforming into wealthy suburban indignation. He lowered his hands, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "Do you have any idea whose house you just broke into? I play golf with the chief of police. I want badge numbers. I want names. You are all going to be looking for mall security jobs by tomorrow morning." Special Agent Miller stepped through the threshold. He did not look intimidated. He did not look impressed by the vaulted ceilings, the sweeping mahogany staircase, or the blustering homeowner. He looked like a man who dealt with arrogant white-collar criminals every single day of his career. He held up a thick manila folder, the federal warrants neatly clipped to the front. "We are not local police, Thomas," Agent Miller said, his voice dropping the formal title entirely. "We are executing a federal search and arrest warrant. Sit down on the bench." Brenda marched out of the dining room, her silk cardigan billowing behind her. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the armed agents occupying her beautiful foyer. Her instinct was not fear. It was sheer, unadulterated entitlement. She let out a shrill, condescending laugh, waving her hand through the air as if she were swatting away an annoying insect. "Oh, this is absolutely ridiculous," Brenda scoffed, turning back to smile brightly at DeAndre and Brittany, who had cautiously followed her out of the dining room. It is just a silly bank error. You know how these massive financial institutions are. Our daughter Amber runs a tech company, and she must have filed some paperwork incorrectly. We will have our lawyers clear this up in 10 minutes. Gentlemen, please step outside. You are ruining my dinner party. Agent Miller did not move a single inch. He stared at Brenda with cold, calculating eyes. He had listened to the audio file I sent him. He knew exactly who this woman was. He knew her tears online were fake, and he knew her confident dismissal right now was a desperate, pathetic charade. This is not a bank error, Brenda. Agent Miller stated, his voice ringing loud and clear, so every person in the house could hear him perfectly. We are not here to discuss a clerical mistake. We are here investigating a coordinated cyber heist. We are here executing warrants for multiple counts of felony wire fraud, identity theft, and extortion. Brittany let out a sharp, panicked gasp. She pressed her hands against her mouth, her eyes darting wildly between her parents and the federal agents. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She knew exactly what was happening. She remembered the massive federal fraud notice I had handed her in the kitchen. She remembered shoving it into her purse to hide it from her husband. The reality of her actions was currently standing in her foyer wearing Kevlar. DeAndre stepped forward. He moved past his panicked wife, his broad shoulders squared. The wholesome, easygoing smile he usually wore was completely gone. His brow was furrowed in deep, disturbing confusion. He was a man who lived his life by a strict moral code, and he was currently watching his new in-laws being cornered by the FBI. Extortion. DeAndre asked, his voice steady, but carrying a dangerous edge. Identity theft. What exactly are you accusing them of? Thomas immediately tried to run interference. He stepped in front of DeAndre, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. DeAndre, do not engage with them. It is a massive misunderstanding. Amber is clearly having a psychological breakdown. She is trying to frame us because she is jealous of your marriage. Do not listen to a single word they say. Agent Miller ignored Thomas entirely. He looked directly at DeAndre, recognizing him from the background dossier the Bureau had pulled on the family. Miller opened the heavy manila folder and began reading the itemized charges out loud, refusing to let Brenda and Thomas hide behind their suburban privilege. We have irrefutable digital evidence that Thomas and Brenda engaged in a calculated scheme to steal the identity of their oldest daughter, Agent Miller announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. They illegally opened a massive line of credit in her name. The IP addresses used to authorize the fraud point directly to the router sitting in the home office down that hall. The electronic signatures were executed from a mobile device registered to Brittany. This is harassment! Brenda shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical register. She grabbed Thomas's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. You cannot come into my home and accuse my family of stealing. We are respectable people. Agent Miller did not even blink. He flipped to the second page of the warrant. Respectable people do not finance their lifestyle with stolen identities, he countered sharply. We have the exact merchant logs. We are actively seizing the assets purchased with the stolen funds. He looked directly at DeAndre, delivering the final crushing blow. We are seizing the $40,000 down payment used to purchase the luxury SUV currently parked in your driveway. And we have secured the wire transfer logs detailing exactly $138,000 in stolen funds. Miller paused, letting the numbers hang heavily in the silent, suffocating air of the foyer. He read the final line of the warrant. Those stolen funds were wired directly to a historic estate venue in Newport, an elite organic catering service, and a luxury floral designer. The words echoed off the marble floors. $138,000, Newport venue, caterers, florists. DeAndre froze. His entire body went rigid. He did not look at the agents. He slowly turned his head to look at Thomas. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in his mind with devastating clarity. He remembered my conversation in the living room. He remembered me casually mentioning the astronomical cost of the Newport wedding. He remembered Thomas looking him dead in the eye and bragging about liquidating a low-yield savings account to pay for the entire wedding in cash. He remembered Thomas boasting about starting their marriage off without any financial burdens. DeAndre looked at Brittany. She was trembling violently, tears streaming down her face, refusing to meet his gaze. She looked guilty. She looked terrified. She looked exactly like a woman who knew she had been caught. The pristine, perfect facade of the family he had married into completely shattered. He had not married into a wealthy, respectable, loving family. He had married into a syndicate of thieves. The luxurious, magical wedding weekend he had just experienced was not a generous gift from a loving father. It was a crime scene. Every flower, every plate of food, every song played by the string quartet had been funded by stolen money. His entire wedding was a fraud, and he was staring right at the people who had orchestrated it. Agent Miller did not linger to watch the family implode. He had delivered the reality checks, served the federal subpoenas, and executed the asset seizure notices with mechanical precision. The agents moved through the house, efficiently documenting evidence and tagging the luxury SUV in the driveway before filing out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, leaving a suffocating, ringing silence in the grand foyer. The flashing red and blue lights of the local police cruisers accompanying the FBI faded down the street, but the devastating reality of their visit remained firmly planted in the room. DeAndre stood completely still. His broad shoulders were rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered beneath his skin. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of integrity and hard work. He had believed he was marrying into a family that shared those values. Instead, he was standing in the epicenter of a federal crime scene. He slowly turned his head to look at his new wife. Brittany was backed against the mahogany console table, her breath coming in short, erratic gasps. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Tell me the truth," DeAndre said, his voice dangerously quiet. The booming, joyful tone he usually carried was entirely absent. "Tell me exactly what you knew about this money." Brittany physically recoiled from the coldness in his voice. She looked at her parents, then back to DeAndre, her survival instincts kicking in. The pampered, protected facade melted away, replaced by a desperate, frantic scramble to save herself. "I did not know anything," Brittany cried out, her voice shrill and trembling. "I swear to you, DeAndre, I had absolutely no idea. Mom and Dad told me they were paying for everything. They said they had liquidated a special savings account just for the wedding. I am just as shocked as you are. They lied to me." Brenda let out an offended gasp, clutching her chest as if physically struck. "Brittany, how could you say that? We did this for you." "Shut up, Mom!" Brittany screamed, completely throwing her parents under the bus without a second thought. "You ruined everything. You stole Amber's money and you dragged me into this mess. You told me to just sign the authorization forms and not ask questions. You told me it was a family trust. You set me up." DeAndre watched his wife desperately try to rewrite history. He watched her point fingers and shift blame, portraying herself as a naive, innocent victim of her parents' greed. For a fleeting second, a part of him wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe the woman he married was just a pawn in Brenda and Thomas's twisted game. But DeAndre was not a fool. He was an observant, meticulous man. As Brittany threw her hands up in frantic denial, the light from the foyer chandelier caught the spectacular arrangement of diamonds resting against her collarbone. It was a custom $20,000 necklace. Brenda and Thomas had presented it to Brittany at the rehearsal dinner, calling it a precious family heirloom, newly purchased to celebrate the merging of their families. DeAndre remembered the exact moment they clasped it around her neck. He also remembered Agent Miller's itemized list of stolen assets. The federal agent had specifically mentioned a $20,000 jewelry purchase, flagged on Amber's fraudulently obtained credit line. DeAndre stared at the glittering diamonds. The sickening truth washed over him, extinguishing any remaining hope he had for his marriage. "Take the necklace off," DeAndre demanded, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. Brittany froze her hand instinctively, flying to her throat to protect the jewels. "What, DeAndre? Please, you have to listen to me. I am the victim here." Take off the stolen necklace, Brittany DeAndre repeated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. The FBI just listed a $20,000 jewelry purchase made with your sister's stolen identity. You are wearing it right now. You just admitted your parents told you to sign the authorization forms. You knew exactly where this money was coming from. I did not. Brittany sobbed, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. I thought it was Amber's gift to the family. I thought she was finally sharing her wealth. I did not know they forged the signatures. You signed the documents on your phone. DeAndre stated, his tone flat and unyielding. I was sitting right next to you on the couch last month when you received that notification. You told me it was just a catering contract. You lied to my face. You knew you were authorizing a fraudulent line of credit. You wore the stolen diamonds. You invited your friends to a wedding paid for with felony wire fraud. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. The air in the foyer turned brittle. Thomas tried to step forward again, attempting to assert his usual dominance, but DeAndre shot him a glare so fierce it stopped the older man dead in his tracks. Do not say a single word to me, DeAndre warned Thomas. You are a thief. You look at your own daughter, and you see nothing but a bank account to drain. You disgust me. Both of you disgust me. DeAndre turned his back on his father-in-law and looked at Brittany one last time. The woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to protect and cherish, now looked like a stranger. She was a reflection of her parents, greedy, manipulative, and utterly devoid of moral character. Where are you going? Brittany panicked as DeAndre walked past her and headed straight for the guest bedroom where they had left their luggage. DeAndre, you cannot leave me. We just got married. We are a family. I am not tying my life to a felony, DeAndre called back, not breaking his stride. I am not building a future with a woman who can steal from her own sister and smile in my face about it. He disappeared into the guest room. Less than a minute later, he emerged carrying his leather duffel bag. He walked purposefully down the hallway, his jaw set, his eyes fixed firmly on the front door. He did not look at the lavish dining room. He did not look at the expensive artwork on the walls. He saw only the exit. DeAndre. Please, Brittany begged, running after him and grabbing his arm. You cannot just walk out. What are people going to say? What about our reputation? Even now, facing the collapse of her marriage and impending federal charges, Brittany's primary concern was her social standing. It was the final confirmation DeAndre needed. He gently but firmly pried her fingers off his jacket. Your reputation is already gone, Brittany DeAndre said quietly. The FBI took it with them. I suggest you find a very good defense attorney. He opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. He did not look back as he walked down the driveway, completely ignoring the luxury SUV the agents had tagged for seizure. He walked right past it and headed down the suburban street to call a cab. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the fragile alliance between the remaining family members instantly evaporated. The foyer erupted into a venomous absolute chaos. Brittany turned on her parents with a level of viciousness that perfectly mirrored Brenda's own toxic nature. Her shrill voice echoed through the empty, cavernous house, screaming at Brenda and Thomas for destroying her perfect life, for driving away her husband, and for dragging her into a federal indictment. She hurled accusations at her father, blaming his arrogance for thinking he could outsmart Amber's security systems. She shrieked at her mother, cursing Brenda's obsession with appearances that had fueled the entire reckless scheme. Brenda screamed back, calling Brittany an ungrateful, spoiled brat who had gladly reaped the benefits of the stolen money until the very second it became inconvenient. Thomas shouted over both of them, his booming voice cracking under the sheer pressure of his impending legal ruin. The beautiful, sprawling suburban mansion had become a prison. The perfect family was finally tearing itself apart from the inside out, ripping away years of fake smiles and forced affection until nothing remained but the ugly, undeniable truth. While my family's pristine suburban reality shattered into a million irreparable pieces, I sat in my downtown office watching the sun rise over the city skyline. I had not slept much over the weekend, but I did not feel exhausted. I felt an absolute crystalline clarity. The waiting game was over. The federal machinery had been set into motion, and it was operating with a ruthless efficiency that no amount of country club privilege could halt. By Monday morning, the sudden deafening silence from my parents' camp was the first indicator that the strike had landed. The barrage of hateful Instagram posts ceased completely. Brenda's meticulously curated social media feeds, which had been updated hourly, with tearful accusations and smug vindication, went entirely dark. Marcus walked into my office just before 9 o'clock. He did not look panicked anymore. He looked utterly stunned. He placed his tablet on my desk and pointed to a financial news aggregate site. A prominent business blog had just published an exclusive breaking report. The headline confirmed that federal agents from the White Collar Crimes Division had executed search and seizure warrants at the home of a prominent local businessman. Marcus looked at me with wide eyes. Amber, the tech blogs are picking it up. The financial sector is buzzing. The narrative just flipped entirely. You did not just weather the PR storm. You summoned a hurricane and directed it right at their front door. Our enterprise clients are backing off. The board of directors just canceled their emergency meeting. You are completely in the clear. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. The professional vindication was satisfying, but the personal battle was entering its most volatile phase. Narcissists do not simply accept defeat. When their aggression fails and their intimidation tactics are neutralized, they immediately pivot to their secondary defense mechanism. They weaponize their own victimhood. They attempt to trade on the very family bonds they had previously exploited. I knew the phone call was coming. I knew exactly what it would sound like. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my personal cell phone vibrated across my desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it vibrate for 10 long seconds, allowing the tension on the other end of the line to build. I opened my recording software, ensured the audio capture was active, and tapped the screen to answer. Amber, please do not hang up. Brenda's voice was completely unrecognizable. The sharp, aristocratic superiority she normally projected was entirely gone. She sounded frantic, breathless, and utterly broken. She was sobbing so heavily she was practically hyperventilating into the receiver. Amber, please, you have to help us. They took the cars. They froze the bank accounts. Thomas cannot even access his business operating funds. The agents took his computers and all of our financial records. Brittany is having a complete nervous breakdown. DeAndre walked out on her. He packed his bags and left, and she will not stop screaming. You have to call the FBI and tell them to stop. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I listened to the woman who had publicly accused me of being a malicious hacker just 48 hours prior, now begging for her salvation. I do not control the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Brenda. I said, my voice dangerously flat. You committed multiple federal felonies. You committed wire fraud. You forged signatures. You stole my identity to finance a luxury wedding. The government tends to frown upon that. It was a misunderstanding, Brenda wailed, instantly attempting to minimize the sheer scale of their crimes. It was just a silly family misunderstanding. We were going to pay you back, Amber. We just needed a temporary loan for the wedding, and we knew you had the money. We did not mean to hurt you. You are my daughter. We are family. You cannot send your own parents to federal prison over a wedding. The sheer audacity of her manipulation was breathtaking. Even while staring down a federal indictment, she was still trying to gaslight me. She was still trying to reframe grand larceny as a casual family loan. You threatened to destroy my company if I did not silently pay for your theft, I reminded her coldly. You posted a video to millions of people accusing me of a crime I did not commit. You tried to ruin my entire life to cover your tracks. That is not a misunderstanding. That is extortion. I will delete the video. Brenda shrieked, her panic escalating into pure hysteria. I will delete everything right now. I will post a retraction. I will issue a public apology to your company and your clients. I will tell the whole world I was confused and stressed. Please, Amber Thomas's heart cannot take this kind of stress. He is talking about retaining criminal defense attorneys, but we cannot even pay them because our assets are locked. You have made your point. You won. Now please, we need to settle this privately as a family. We are begging you for a meeting." I let the silence stretch over the phone line. I listened to my mother weeping, stripped of her arrogance, stripped of her stolen wealth, finally facing the devastating consequences of her own actions. She thought she could snap her fingers, offer a fake public apology, and sweep multiple federal crimes under the rug. She thought she could invoke the concept of family to escape justice. "I will meet with you," I finally said. "Oh, thank God!" Brenda sobbed, a wave of desperate relief washing over her words. "Thank you, Amber. We can meet at the house. We can sit down and figure out how to explain this to the authorities together." "We are not meeting at your house," I interrupted, my tone slicing through her fragile relief like a scalpel. "We are not having a quiet family chat in your living room, so Thomas can try to intimidate me again. If you want to meet with me, it will be on my terms, in my territory, and under my absolute control." "Anything," Brenda pleaded. "Name your terms." "We will meet tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock sharp. You will come to Nathaniel's corporate law office downtown. You will be sitting in a secure conference room, and you will not be coming alone. I require an impartial witness to everything that is said in that room." "Who?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling with fresh anxiety. "You will bring DeAndre," I stated firmly. "DeAndre?" Brenda gasped. "Amber, I told you he left Brittany. He will not even answer our phone calls. He hates us. We cannot bring him." "That sounds like a logistical problem for you to solve, Brenda," I replied, showing absolutely zero flexibility. DeAndre is the only person involved in this entire disaster who possesses a shred of moral integrity. I will not sit in a room with you, Thomas and Brittany, without a neutral party present to verify exactly what happens. You find DeAndre. You convince him to show up at Nathaniel's firm tomorrow at 10. If he is not sitting at that conference table, the meeting is canceled, and my next communication will be a victim impact statement delivered directly to the federal prosecutor. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. The trap was set for the final time. The morning sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathaniel's downtown law firm. The conference room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, featuring a massive slab of polished marble for a table and ergonomic leather chairs that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. I sat at the head of the table. Nathaniel sat to my right, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression completely unreadable. We did not have long to wait. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy glass doors swung open. Brenda, Thomas, and Brittany marched into the room. They looked haggard. The stress of the federal raid and the frozen assets had etched deep lines into my parents' faces. Brittany's eyes were swollen, her designer clothes rumpled as if she had slept in them. Despite their obvious exhaustion, their posture remained rigid with that familiar, sickening arrogance. They walked in not like criminal suspects facing federal indictment, but like annoyed customers preparing to complain to a retail manager. 2 minutes later, the door opened again. DeAndre stepped inside. He did not look at Brittany. He did not acknowledge Brenda or Thomas. He walked straight to the opposite end of the long marble table and sat down, folding his large hands together. His presence shifted the gravity of the room immediately. Brittany let out a pathetic, stifled sob and tried to catch his eye, but DeAndre stared straight ahead, his jaw locked in stone. Brenda took this as her cue to take charge. She pulled out a chair opposite me, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. Thomas stood behind her like a bodyguard, crossing his arms over his chest. They still believed they were the parents and I was the disobedient child. They still believed this was a family dispute that could be resolved with a stern talking to and a heavy dose of emotional manipulation. "Amber, let us skip the dramatics," Brenda began, her voice tight with forced authority. "We have all had a very stressful weekend. You made your point. You sent your little message with those agents. Now it is time to be adults and clean up this mess before it permanently damages the family reputation." I said nothing. I simply watched her. My silence unnerved her, but she pushed forward, reaching into her oversized leather tote bag. "We are willing to be reasonable," Thomas interjected, leaning over the table to glare at me. "We know you are panicking about your company. We know your board of directors is breathing down your neck because of the video your mother posted. You need that video gone, And you need a public retraction, or your entire career is over by Friday. We hold the keys to your survival, Amber. Brenda pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and slid it across the smooth marble surface. It stopped right in front of Nathaniel. I could see the messy, frantic handwriting covering the page. It was a crude, makeshift contract hastily scribbled on stationery from their kitchen drawer. "That is our settlement offer," Brenda declared, lifting her chin. "I am willing to go online today and tell everyone that the whole thing was a terrible misunderstanding. I will say my account was hacked, and I blamed you in a moment of maternal panic. I will completely restore your public image. In exchange, you will pay off the remaining balance of the wedding vendors. You will officially take responsibility for the credit line, and you will call your contacts at the FBI and tell them to drop the investigation immediately." Brittany finally found her voice, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "Just pay it, Amber. You have the money. You can afford it. If you just pay the vendors, DeAndre can come home, and we can all go back to normal. We can forget this ever happened." I glanced at DeAndre. His eyes widened in sheer disbelief at his wife's words. He looked utterly revolted by the realization that her only regret was getting caught, not the actual theft. She genuinely believed a six-figure wire fraud could simply be purchased and swept away. "You signed that agreement," Thomas demanded, pointing a thick finger at me. "You pay off the debt, you call off the federal dogs, and we give you your company back. If you refuse, Brenda goes on every morning talk show in the state tomorrow and cries about how her millionaire daughter is trying to send her to federal prison. We will make you the most hated woman in the tech industry. You will lose everything." They sat back, crossing their arms, waiting for my submission. They had convinced themselves that this piece of lined paper was a masterstroke of legal negotiation. They believed they held the ultimate leverage. They thought the threat of bad public relations was enough to make a federal cybercrime vanish into thin air. Nathaniel did not pick up the piece of paper. He did not even look at it. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair and let out a sharp, booming laugh. The sound echoed off the glass walls, startling Brenda so badly she physically jumped in her seat. Thomas flushed red with anger. "What is so funny? We are offering her a way out." "You are offering a written confession to felony extortion," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave, razor sharp and entirely devoid of amusement. "You just slid a document across a lawyer's desk demanding a financial payoff in exchange for ceasing a public defamation campaign. You are currently under active federal investigation for wire fraud, and you decided the smartest move was to walk into a corporate law firm and attempt to extort the victim on the record." Nathaniel reached down into his leather briefcase. He hoisted a massive, heavy binder onto the table. It landed on the marble with a thunderous, terrifying slam that made Brittany flinch. The binder was 3 inches thick, packed tightly with printed logs, bank statements, and legal briefs. He pushed it forward, letting it rest directly on top of Brenda's pathetic handwritten note. Nathaniel did not even pause to let the echo of the slamming binder fade before he flipped open the heavy plastic cover. He bypassed Brenda's handwritten settlement offer, entirely treating it like a piece of contaminated trash, brushing it aside to reveal the first tabbed section of his files. His manicured fingers traced the edge of a stack of dense highlighted network logs. He slid the first packet across the smooth marble, positioning it perfectly between Thomas and Brenda. "Let us begin with the digital footprint," Nathaniel stated, his voice a calm, even baritone that commanded absolute attention. "When you executed the fraudulent credit line applications, you assumed that hiding behind a basic commercial virtual private network would shield your location. It did not. The Cybercrimes Division subpoenaed your service provider. We have the direct origin logs. Every single fraudulent authorization, every transfer of funds, and every forged signature traces back to a single IP address." Nathaniel tapped the paper with his expensive silver pen. "That IP address is registered directly to the router sitting in your home office, Thomas." Thomas opened his mouth, his face flushing a dangerous shade of magenta, but Nathaniel cut him off instantly with a sharp raising of his hand. "Do not speak," Nathaniel ordered. He turned his piercing gaze to Brittany, who was visibly shrinking into her expensive leather chair. "And lest you attempt to claim a rogue hacker magically compromised your secure home network, we have the localized device logs." The primary authorization for the $138,000 initial transfer was executed via an electronic signature platform. The service captured the device identification, the network address, and the precise geolocation data of the phone used to sign Amber's name. Nathaniel slid a second packet across the table. The device is a mobile phone registered to you, Brittany. The timestamp is 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Financial records show you purchased a coffee at a cafe exactly 1 block away from your bridal boutique just 10 minutes prior. Your phone pinged the cafe's public network. We have you placed exactly at the scene of the digital crime holding the weapon. Brittany let out a choked gasp, covering her mouth with both trembling hands. DeAndre did not move a single muscle, but his eyes locked onto the document sitting in front of his wife, silently reading the undeniable, unchangeable proof of her guilt. He sat like a stone statue at the end of the table, absorbing the reality of the family he had almost joined. "This is a violation of our privacy," Brenda stammered, grabbing the edge of the table as her knuckles turned white. "You cannot use this information. We are family. We were just trying to survive a stressful financial period." Nathaniel ignored her tears entirely. He reached over to his laptop, tapped a few keys, and a crisp, clear audio file began to play through the conference room's surround sound speakers. The room was instantly filled with Brenda's own voice. It was not the sobbing, desperate woman currently sitting at the table. It was the vicious, venomous woman from the living room confrontation days prior. "If you do not pay this, Amber, I will destroy your company. I will go online and tell the world you are a thief. I will make sure your clients drop you. You will pay for this wedding, or you will lose everything." The recording echoed off the polished glass walls. DeAndre physically recoiled in his chair, his face twisted in absolute, visceral disgust as he listened to the pure malice dripping from his mother-in-law's recorded voice. He looked at Brenda as if she were a venomous snake that had somehow slithered onto the marble table. Brenda buried her face in her hands, realizing that her sweet maternal facade was permanently destroyed in front of the one man she desperately wanted to impress. Nathaniel closed his laptop with a soft snap. That Nathaniel said the temperature in the room dropping to absolute zero is textbook federal extortion. Coupled with identity theft and felony wire fraud, you have built a spectacular criminal portfolio. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the marble table, bringing his face closer to my parents. "Let me explain your current reality, because your handwritten settlement offer indicates a severe, almost clinical delusion regarding your bargaining power. Wire fraud carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Extortion carries a separate penalty. Aggravated identity theft carries a mandatory consecutive 2-year sentence. The federal prosecutor is not looking for a handwritten apology or a retracted social media post. They are looking at a flawlessly documented case that will put all 3 of you in federal prison for the better part of a decade." The silence in the room was suffocating. The reality of a federal prison sentence finally pierced through decades of suburban entitlement and extreme arrogance. Brenda Thomas and Brittany looked at each other with wide, hollow eyes. They could not manipulate a federal judge. They could not gaslight the FBI. They could not scream cry or bully their way out of irrefutable digital forensics. They were entirely, hopelessly trapped, and they finally knew it. The arrogant, blustering patriarch completely crumbled under the pressure. Thomas sprang to his feet, his heavy leather chair scraping violently against the floorboards. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving, as raw panic seized his entire body. He looked wildly from Nathaniel to me, completely abandoning his wife and daughter in a desperate, pathetic bid for self-preservation. "I will pay it!" Thomas blurted out, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "I will pay back every single cent right now. I will list the house today. I will take out a second mortgage. I will liquidate my entire retirement portfolio and empty every account I have. I will write you a check for the full amount plus damages before we leave this building. Just call the agents off Amber. Take the money and make this go away." The raw desperation in his voice was a pathetic contrast to the booming authoritative tone he had used to terrorize me since childhood. Thomas stood there, sweating profusely through his expensive tailored suit, offering up the ultimate symbol of his perceived superiority. The sweeping suburban estate, the manicured lawns, the marble foyer where he had stood just days ago and boasted about his financial supremacy to DeAndre. He genuinely believed it was his ultimate trump card. He believed he could buy his way out of a federal prison sentence by liquidating his crown jewel. I looked at Nathaniel. The high-powered corporate attorney simply leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and watched the spectacle with clinical fascination. He did not say a word. He knew exactly what was coming next, and he was perfectly content to let me deliver the execution. I shifted my gaze back to Thomas. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. You cannot mortgage a house you do not own. Thomas, I stated the words, dropping like lead weights onto the glass table. The frantic, panicked energy in the room ground to an absolute screeching halt. Thomas froze in place, his mouth hanging slightly open. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving a sickly ashen gray in its wake. He slowly sank back into his leather chair, looking as if the air had been violently knocked out of his lungs. His confident posture completely collapsed. Brenda let out a short, dismissive scoff. It was a nervous sound, a desperate, frantic attempt to maintain her grip on her fabricated reality. What on earth are you talking about, Amber? Of course we own the house. It is fully paid off. Thomas took care of the final mortgage payment 5 years ago. Stop trying to confuse us with these ridiculous legal games. I kept my eyes locked on Thomas. He was not looking at Brenda. He was not looking at me. He was staring blindly at his own trembling hands resting on the polished table. Tell her, Thomas, I commanded softly. Tell your wife about the final mortgage payment. Tell her about the offshore investment accounts that tanked. Tell her about the high-stakes sports betting syndicate you thought you were smart enough to beat. Tell her where all the money actually went. Brenda snapped her head toward her husband. Thomas, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell her right now. Thomas did not speak. He could not even look at her. Since Thomas has suddenly lost his legendary voice, I will explain it for him. I continued addressing the room, but keeping my focus entirely on the man who had mocked my business acumen for years. Thomas did not pay off the mortgage 5 years ago. He refinanced it. He pulled every single cent of equity out of that sprawling estate to cover massive, catastrophic losses in the market. When those highly leveraged, incredibly reckless investments vanished, he turned to gambling to recoup the missing funds. He leveraged the house, the cars, and the retirement accounts. He bled your entire net worth dry while maintaining his membership at the country club and buying you custom diamond necklaces to keep up appearances. Brittany let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked at her father as if he had suddenly morphed into a monster. The pristine, untouchable wealth she had based her entire personality around was evaporating right in front of her eyes. That is a lie, Brenda said, her voice rising in pitch, teetering on the edge of a complete psychological breakdown. He is a financial advisor. He manages millions. We have a massive portfolio. We have assets. Thomas, tell them. He has nothing, Brenda, I cut in sharply, refusing to let her hide behind her delusions for another second. 3 years ago, the house of cards completely collapsed. The bank called in the debts. Thomas defaulted on the primary mortgage, the secondary loans, and the various lines of credit. He received the final notice of default right around the time you were planning your lavish European vacation. The bank foreclosed on the property. They took the house, Brenda. You do not own a single brick of that estate. You have not owned it for 36 months. Brenda grabbed Thomas by the arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into his expensive suit jacket. Thomas, look at me. Tell me this vindictive little brat is lying. Tell me we own our home. Thomas slowly turned his head. His eyes were completely defeated. I am sorry, Brenda. He rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I thought I could win it back. I thought I could fix it before you found out. Brenda let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She physically shoved herself away from him, her chair rolling backward until it hit the glass wall behind her. The grand illusion of her aristocratic life shattered into dust. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was a squatter living in a foreclosed property, wearing stolen diamonds and facing a federal indictment. Brittany buried her face in her hands, weeping openly. Her entire worldview was tied to her parents' bank accounts. Without their money, she was nothing. DeAndre sat at the far end of the table, his expression completely unreadable, watching the family he almost married into completely self-destruct. The righteous indignation he had felt over the stolen wedding funds was now compounding with the realization that Thomas was a total fraud. Thomas had looked DeAndre in the eye and lectured him on financial responsibility, all while hiding a colossal mountain of gambling debt. If the bank foreclosed 3 years ago, Brittany sobbed, lifting her tear-streaked face. Why are we still living there? Why did nobody come to kick us out? Why did the bank not evict us immediately? I reached into Nathaniel's massive evidence binder. I pulled out a heavy watermarked document bound in blue legal framing. I placed my hand flat on top of it and slowly slid it across the long marble table. It glided effortlessly, stopping precisely in the center, equidistant from Brenda, Thomas, and Brittany. Because the bank did not keep the property, I explained, leaning back in my chair and watching the devastating realization dawn on their faces. The bank immediately put it up for private auction to recoup the massive debts Thomas left behind. A private buyer purchased the estate entirely in cash. The buyer utilized a blind corporate trust to maintain complete anonymity. The new owner instructed the bank to allow the current occupants to remain on a month-to-month unwritten lease, completely rent-free until further notice. Thomas stared at the document sitting on the table. His hand trembled violently as he reached out and flipped open the blue cover. He read the top page. He read the name of the holding company. He read the signature of the primary beneficiary of the blind trust. His eyes darted up to meet mine, wide with absolute horror. I bought the house, Thomas. I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the conference room. When the bank listed it, I purchased the estate in cash. I am the anonymous buyer. I am the holding company. I have been paying the property taxes, the maintenance fees, and the homeowners association dues for the past 3 years. You have been living in my house. You have been sleeping under my roof. I am your landlord, and as of this exact moment, your month-to-month lease is officially terminated. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The silence that gripped the conference room was no longer just shocked. It was suffocating. It was the sound of an entire fabricated reality imploding all at once. Brenda stared at the blue-backed deed. Her eyes darted across the text, searching for a loophole. A typo, anything that would prove this was a cruel prank. Her manicured finger traced the signature line, stopping on my name. The name of the daughter she had relentlessly mocked, belittled, and ostracized for not measuring up to her impossible aristocratic standards. You bought it, Brenda whispered, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge, reduced to a hollow, breathy rasp. You bought our house. I did not buy your house, Brenda. I corrected, my tone completely flat. I bought the bank's house. You were just the squatters they left inside. The psychological weight of the revelation visibly crushed them. I watched as 3 years of unearned arrogance evaporated from their faces. Every smug comment Thomas had made at Thanksgiving dinners about my little tech startup failing. Every time Brenda had bragged to her country club friends about her sprawling estate while strategically omitting my existence. Every time Brittany had flaunted her supposed wealth, treating me like the family embarrassment who could not afford her lifestyle. It was all a lie, and not just a lie, it was a delusion entirely subsidized by my charity. For 36 months they had lived rent-free. They had slept in their custom king-sized bed, walked across imported hardwood floors, and hosted lavish dinner parties in a dining room they did not own. While they were busy calling me a disappointment, I was quietly paying their property taxes. While they were banning me from family photos to maintain their elite image, I was paying the homeowners association fees that kept the neighborhood security from dragging them out onto the curb. Every single time you paraded me around your country club friends as the cautionary tale of the family, I continued, my voice steady and cold. You were doing it from a stage that I bought and paid for. Do you have any idea what it took to sit across from you at Christmas, listening to you call me a failure, knowing that the only reason you were not eating dinner in a county shelter was because I authorized the property tax payment that very morning? Thomas buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, guttural groan of absolute defeat. The patriarch of the family, the man who had demanded total submission from everyone around him, was now physically curled into a ball of shame. He knew the depths of his financial ruin, but he had never imagined that the safety net catching his fall was woven entirely by the daughter he despised. "This cannot be legal!" Brenda suddenly snapped, looking wildly at Nathaniel. Her panic was manifesting as erratic, desperate anger. "You cannot secretly buy a property and not tell the occupants. We have rights. We have squatters' rights. We have a claim to that estate." Nathaniel did not even blink. "You have absolutely no claim to the estate, Brenda," he replied, his voice smooth and lethally professional. "The purchase was executed through a blind trust, perfectly within the bounds of state and federal real estate law. The bank notified you of the foreclosure. The bank notified you of the auction. You chose to ignore those notices. When the new ownership took over, you were legally classified as holdover tenants. Amber generously allowed you to remain without charging you market-rate rent, which for a property of that magnitude would have been roughly $12,000 a month." Nathaniel paused, letting that massive number sink in. "She subsidized your lifestyle to the tune of over $400,000 in waived rent alone. And how did you repay her generosity? You conspired to extort her, steal her money, and ruin her corporate reputation." Brittany let out a loud, hysterical wail. She turned on her mother, her face blotchy and red. "You lied to me. You told me Dad was making millions. You told me we were rich. We are broke. We do not even own a house. We are living on Amber's charity." "Shut up, Brittany," Thomas hissed, his voice muffled behind his hands. "Just shut up." "Do not tell me to shut up," Brittany screamed, slamming her palms onto the marble table. "My wedding is ruined. My husband hates me. We are going to prison. And now you are telling me I am practically homeless." At the word husband, DeAndre finally moved. He stood up slowly, pushing his heavy leather chair back. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor commanded the attention of the entire room. He buttoned his suit jacket, his face set in a mask of cold, unbreakable resolve. He looked at Thomas, then at Brenda, and finally at his weeping wife. "I came here today because I needed to hear the truth directly from the source," DeAndre said, his voice deep and completely devoid of warmth. "I needed to know if the woman I married was capable of committing a federal crime against her own flesh and blood. You not only committed the crime, but you also tried to blackmail her to cover it up. And you, Thomas, you sat in my living room and lectured me about financial legacy while secretly gambling away your family's home. You are all frauds, every single one of you." "DeAndre, please," Brittany begged, reaching her hand out toward him. "Please do not leave me. We can fix this. We can start over. I will be contacting my attorney this afternoon to file for an annulment," DeAndre stated, stepping away from the table. "Do not call me. Do not text me. If you try to come to my house, I will have you arrested for trespassing." He turned to me and gave a brief, respectful nod. "I am sorry for what they did to you, Amber. You deserved better family than this." With that, DeAndre turned on his heel and walked out of the conference room. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him with a definitive click, sealing Brittany's fate. She collapsed over the table, sobbing hysterically into her arms. Her perfect, aristocratic marriage was officially over before the honeymoon even began. Brenda stared at the closed doors, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked like a woman who had just realized she was standing on the tracks with a freight train bearing down on her. She turned her panicked gaze back to me. "Amber," Brenda pleaded, her voice cracking. Her arrogant facade had completely melted away, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. "Please, you have made your point. You have completely humiliated us. We have lost DeAndre. We have lost our pride. Please just call off the FBI. We will do whatever you want. We will sign whatever you need. Just do not take the house. It is all we have left. Where will we go? We have no savings. We have no credit. We will be on the street." "You are right, Brenda," I said softly. my voice completely steady. You do not have savings. You do not have credit. And you definitely do not have a house. I reached my hand into the front pocket of Nathaniel's evidence binder. I bypassed the financial logs and the network tracking data. My fingers closed around a thick, brightly colored document that Nathaniel had prepared for me earlier that morning. I pulled it out and held it up for them to see. It was not a settlement offer. It was not a plea for an apology. I placed the bright yellow sheet of paper squarely on top of the property deed and slid it toward Brenda. DeAndre had his hand on the heavy stainless steel handle of the glass door, ready to walk out of our lives forever, but the sheer gravity of my announcement anchored him to the floor. He slowly turned back around, his eyes darting from the bright yellow eviction notice to Thomas's ashen, terrified face. He stepped back into the room, unable to look away from the final absolute demolition of the empire his fiancée had bragged about for the entirety of their relationship. Brenda stared at the yellow paper as if it were coated in lethal poison. She reached out with a trembling hand, but refused to actually touch the document. Her breathing was ragged, her chest heaving under her expensive silk blouse. "You cannot do this," Brenda whispered, her voice cracking under the massive weight of her sudden poverty. "There are laws. There are tenant protections in this state. You cannot just snap your fingers and throw a family out onto the street. You have to give us a minimum of 30 days. You have to take us to housing court and file a formal petition. We will fight this. We will hire a lawyer and we will stay in that house." Nathaniel adjusted his suit jacket, his expression completely unbothered by her frantic legal threats. He offered her a smile entirely devoid of any warmth. "Under normal circumstances, Brenda, you would be absolutely correct," Nathaniel stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "A standard holdover tenant with a month-to-month agreement is entitled to a standard 30-day notice. However, you did not sign a standard residential lease with the Blind Trust. When the bank transitioned the property and allowed you to remain, the paperwork you hastily signed to avoid immediate homelessness contained a very specific, non-negotiable set of stipulations." Nathaniel tapped the massive evidence binder sitting on the marble table. "Clause Section 4. Paragraph B of your occupancy agreement explicitly states that any illegal activity conducted on the premises immediately nullifies all tenant protections," Nathaniel explained. "It triggers an emergency forfeiture of the property. You do not just have a civil dispute, Brenda. You have a highly documented, irrefutable federal crime. Brittany used the residential network to commit wire fraud. Thomas used the home office router to execute identity theft. You turned my client's property into the staging ground for a felony extortion plot." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, making sure I held eye contact with each of them. For my entire life, I had watched these three people operate with an unshakable sense of superiority. They had treated me like a peasant who was merely lucky to breathe their air. Now the glossy, aristocratic veneer had completely melted away, leaving behind three terrified, penniless squatters. "Because you used my house to steal my money, the 30-day grace period is entirely void." I told them, my voice icy and precise. "State housing regulations allow for an expedited emergency eviction when the property is actively being used to commit a felony. You do not have a month. You do not have a week. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your clothes, take your personal belongings, and vacate my property." 48 hours. Thomas choked out, grasping his chest as if his heart was giving out. "Amber, please, be reasonable. We have lived there for 20 years. We have antique furniture. We have thousands of belongings, heirlooms, and appliances. We cannot pack an entire sprawling estate in 2 days. We have nowhere to put it. We have no money for movers. We cannot even afford a storage unit." "Then I highly suggest you start filling trash bags right now," I replied coldly, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the man who had happily watched me suffer. "Because at exactly 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, a private security firm will arrive at the front gates of the estate. They will change every single lock on the premises. They will activate a completely new, state-of-the-art alarm system. Anything left inside the house after that deadline will be legally considered abandoned property and immediately surrendered to the trust. If you are still standing inside the foyer when my security team arrives, you will be arrested and hauled away in handcuffs for criminal trespassing. The psychological weight of the situation finally crushed them completely. Brenda looked physically ill, her skin taking on a sickly green hue. The reality that she would have to face her elite country club friends as a homeless foreclosed fraud was a fate worse than death to her. She would have no prestigious address to host her lavish garden parties. She would have no sweeping marble staircase to pose on for her holiday cards. She was going to be destitute, living out of garbage bags. Realizing her parents were entirely powerless, Brittany spun around in her chair. She began hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair sticking to her tear-soaked cheeks. She looked at DeAndre, who was still standing near the glass doors, watching the destruction of the family with cold, clinical detachment. Brittany gasped, practically throwing herself out of the leather chair. She stumbled toward him, her hands outstretched, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the light of the conference room chandelier. DeAndre, please. You heard them? We are going to be on the street. My parents have absolutely nothing. They are going to take the house. We have nowhere to go. DeAndre took a distinct step backward, firmly refusing to let her touch him. His jaw was set in granite. We can move into your townhouse, Brittany pleaded, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. It is large enough for all of us. We can put my parents in the guest suites until we figure this out. We can still get married. We do not need a big wedding anymore. We can just go to the courthouse tomorrow. You love me. You promised to take care of me. You cannot just let your family be thrown onto the street like trash. She was weaponizing the very concept of family she had just spent months destroying. She genuinely believed that DeAndre's moral compass would force him to rescue them from the consequences of their own horrific actions. She thought her frantic tears would override his logic and erase the federal crimes she had committed. DeAndre looked at Brittany. There was no sympathy in his eyes. There was no lingering affection or warmth. There was only absolute, unfiltered disgust. He looked at her as if she were a parasite desperately trying to attach itself to a brand new host. My family? DeAndre repeated, his voice dangerously low and thick with contempt. You are not my family, Brittany. You are a criminal who stole from your own sister to fund a party. He did not turn around and walk away. Instead, he maintained his fierce glare, set his jaw, and reached down into his own leather briefcase resting by his feet. He pulled a crisp, cream-colored envelope from the depths of his briefcase. It was thick, professional, and bore the unmistakable embossed seal of one of the most ruthless family law practices in the city. He tossed it onto the polished marble table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud directly beside my bright yellow eviction notice. Brittany stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. Her chest heaved with violent, erratic breaths. What is that? She choked out, her voice barely recognizable through her hysterical sobbing. DeAndre, please, just talk to me. Do not do this. There is absolutely nothing left to talk about. DeAndre replied, his voice completely stripped of the warmth he had once reserved for her. I spent the entire night meeting with my legal team. I had them pull every single financial disclosure you submitted during our prenuptial negotiations. Every document you signed, every asset you claimed to possess, and every debt you conveniently omitted. You built our entire relationship on a foundation of calculated, deliberate fraud. You presented yourself as an equal partner from a successful aristocratic family. In reality, you are an unemployed squatter facing a multi-count federal indictment. He pointed a long, accusing finger at the cream-colored envelope. Those are annulment papers, DeAndre stated, his words ringing with absolute finality. Because you committed fundamental financial fraud from the very inception of our relationship, my attorneys assured me a judge will dissolve this marriage as if it never existed. I refuse to be legally, financially, or socially tied to a family of felons. I will not let my reputation or the company I built be dragged through the mud when the federal government formally indicts you and your parents for wire fraud. Brittany shook her head frantically, her perfectly styled hair flying in wild directions. Her heavy, expensive makeup was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. No, no, no. I am your wife. We took vows. You cannot just erase me. I did it for us. I did it so we could have the perfect wedding. You did it because you are a parasite. DeAndre fired back, his voice rising in volume, echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. You did not steal your sister's money for us. You stole it because your entire identity is wrapped up in an illusion of wealth that you never actually possessed. You wanted the grand society wedding to prove to your friends that you were elite. You used me to hide your poverty. You used my name to mask your family's catastrophic failures. Sign the papers, Brittany. My lawyers will be in touch to collect the engagement ring. Do not attempt to sell it, or I will add grand larceny to your growing list of criminal charges. The devastation was absolute. The golden child, the undeniable favorite who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was completely destroyed in a single moment. She had lost her wealthy, successful husband. She had lost her elite social status. She had lost the sprawling estate she used to impress her friends. She was reduced to absolutely nothing. She slumped forward, resting her head on the cool marble table, weeping with a loud, guttural intensity that filled the room. Brenda tried to reach out to comfort her daughter, but her hands were shaking so violently she could barely lift her arms. Thomas simply stared blankly at the wall, a broken, defeated man who had finally run out of lies to tell. The suffocating arrogance that had defined their existence for 30 years was entirely gone. They had walked into this law firm demanding a payout and expecting total submission. Now they were leaving with nothing but an eviction notice and a ruined marriage. Nathaniel leaned forward and pressed a small silver button hidden beneath the edge of his massive desk. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. Two large, broad-shouldered security guards stepped into the room, their expressions stern and uncompromising. Our business here is concluded, Nathaniel announced, his tone shifting back to the clinical, detached professionalism of a high-powered corporate attorney. Brenda looked up, her eyes wide with fresh panic. You cannot just throw us out. We need to figure out what to do. We need to talk to Amber. Amber. Please, you have to help us. You are our daughter. You stopped being my family the moment you stole my money and threatened my livelihood, I replied, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. I have nothing left to say to you. Pack your garbage bags and get out of my house. Nathaniel stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive movement. I highly recommend you spend the next 48 hours packing your belongings into whatever boxes you can scrounge up, he advised, staring down at my parents. Furthermore, as a professional courtesy, I will inform you that the FBI Cybercrimes Division is already in possession of the network logs and the audio recordings of your extortion attempt. Thomas flinched as if he had been physically struck with a baseball bat. They will be in touch regarding your impending indictments very soon. Nathaniel continued, delivering the final devastating blow with cold precision. The federal prosecutor has flagged all 3 of your passports. I strongly advise against attempting to leave the state or emptying any remaining bank accounts. It will only accelerate the process of your arrest. Now security will escort you out of the building. If you cause a scene in the lobby, they have strict instructions to call the local police and have you removed in handcuffs. The security guards stepped forward, gesturing toward the open doors. It was over. The absolute destruction of their toxic empire was complete. Thomas slowly pushed himself up from his chair, his movements stiff and sluggish, like a man aging 20 years in a matter of minutes. He did not look at me. He did not look at Nathaniel. He simply turned and shuffled toward the exit, his head hung low in total defeat. Brenda grabbed Brittany by the arm, hauling her weeping, hysterical daughter out of the leather chair. Brittany could barely stand, her legs buckling under the crushing weight of her ruined life. She sobbed openly, a loud, pathetic wail that echoed down the polished hallway as they were led away. They did not look back. They did not utter another word of defiance. The great, untouchable patriarch and his arrogant, entitled family were marched out of the corporate law firm, like common criminals, broken, weeping, and facing the devastating reality of the prison sentences waiting for them. The 48-hour deadline expired exactly as promised. I did not attend the final eviction in person, preferring to let Nathaniel and my private security team handle the logistics of physically removing the rotting core of my family tree from the property. According to the daily logs provided by the security chief, the packing process was an unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. Without the funds to hire a professional moving company or secure a luxury storage unit, Thomas and Brenda were forced to rent a battered moving truck with whatever limits remained on their maxed-out credit cards. They spent 2 frantic sleepless nights shoving priceless antiques, designer clothes, and imported crystal into industrial garbage bags. The sheer indignity of hauling trash bags full of luxury items across the manicured lawn of their former estate broke whatever fractured pride they had left. When the security team arrived precisely at 10 in the morning on Thursday to change the locks, Brenda was literally dragged off the porch, weeping hysterically while clutching a single framed photograph of the country club she would never be allowed to enter again. Her dramatic protests echoed off the manicured hedges, but the security personnel remained entirely unmoved by her theatrical display. Their immediate destination was a harsh awakening to their new reality. Stripped of their stolen assets and blacklisted by every social contact who had seen the evening news broadcasts about their impending indictments, Brenda and Thomas relocated to a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of the city. The contrast was absolutely poetic. The woman who had once ridiculed my modest college apartment was now living in a cramped, stale-smelling room with peeling wallpaper and a flickering neon sign buzzing outside her window. There were no catered dinners or hired staff to fetch her dry cleaning. There was only the terrifying, inescapable wait for the federal trial. The FBI did not drag their feet. Within a week, the indictments for wire fraud and identity theft were formally handed down. The assets they had managed to hoard were seized as evidence, leaving them reliant on a public defender who had absolutely zero patience for Thomas's lingering arrogance. They were trapped in a miserable purgatory of their own making, terrified of the prison sentences that were virtually guaranteed given the mountain of digital evidence Nathaniel had handed over to the prosecutors. Brittany suffered a completely different, yet equally devastating kind of annihilation. DeAndre moved with lethal efficiency, securing the annulment in record time. Because the marriage was fundamentally predicated on financial fraud, the judge granted the dissolution without a second thought. DeAndre legally erased her from his life, reclaiming his engagement ring and cutting off her access to his accounts before she could even formulate a plan to manipulate him. Left with absolutely nowhere to go, she was forced to join our parents in that miserable motel room. But her true punishment unfolded in the public arena. The details of the fraud leaked online, rapidly circulating through the very social media circles she had spent years carefully cultivating. The internet is exceptionally unforgiving to exposed frauds. Her influencer status, built entirely on the illusion of generational wealth and aristocratic superiority, evaporated overnight. Her comment sections were flooded with mocking remarks and screenshots of the foreclosure notices. Brands immediately dropped their sponsorships, distancing themselves from a woman facing federal charges. The digital empire she valued more than her own sister was completely reduced to ash. A few weeks after the dust settled, a courier arrived at my office holding a thick envelope. It was a handwritten note from DeAndre. He kept it brief, professional, and remarkably sincere. He thanked me for having the courage to expose the truth before he became permanently entangled in their web of lies and debt. He mentioned that his company had just closed a major international deal and that he was moving forward with a clear conscience. He wished me the best in my endeavors and expressed a genuine hope that I would finally find the peace I deserved. I shredded the note after reading it, severing the very last cord that tied me to Brittany's toxic existence. 2 months after the eviction, I drove back to the estate. I pulled through the wrought iron gates and parked my car in the massive circular driveway. The security system deactivated flawlessly as I keyed in my personal code, granting me access to the property I had rightfully earned. I pushed open the heavy oak double doors and stepped into the grand foyer. The house was completely empty. The echoes of my footsteps bounced off the bare walls and the polished hardwood floors. There was no shouting, there was no condescending laughter, There were no venomous whispers drifting down from the upstairs landing. The oppressive, suffocating energy that had haunted this property for my entire life was entirely gone. The shell of the house remained, but the poison had been completely extracted. I walked through the cavernous dining room where I had endured decades of humiliation. I stood in the exact spot where Thomas had demanded I surrender my startup. I waited for the familiar surge of anger to hit me, but it never came. The rage that had fueled my silent, methodical revenge had burned itself out entirely, leaving a clean, blank slate behind. In its place, there was only a profound, unshakable peace. I did not want this house. I had no intention of living in a museum dedicated to my painful childhood. I had already instructed Nathaniel to list the property on the market the following Monday. The proceeds from the sale would be folded directly into the expansion of my tech company, fueling my next major round of hiring and development. I turned around and walked out the front doors, locking them securely behind me. I walked down the stone steps, got into my car, and gripped the steering wheel. I looked at the estate one last time, feeling lighter than I ever had in my entire life. I put the car in drive and accelerated down the private road, heading back to the city, back to my thriving company, and back to the brilliant future I had built with my own two hands. I had successfully reclaimed my name, my finances, and my sanity. The ultimate sweet revenge was not just watching them fall, it was the boundless, untouchable freedom I found when I finally let them go. The most profound takeaway from Amber's journey is that true vindication doesn't require stooping to a toxic family's level. It requires removing their access to you entirely. Manipulative people will inevitably orchestrate their own downfall through their greed, arrogance, and lies. Your greatest revenge is simply letting the natural consequences of their actions catch up to them while you completely secure your own boundaries. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire to keep destructive relatives warm. Real power is found the moment you stop seeking their approval, reclaim your independence, and realize your ultimate triumph is absolute, unshakable peace. Share your own story of reclaiming your independence and protecting your peace in the comments below. If Amber's journey to absolute freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of survival, boundary setting, and success. Remember, walking away from toxicity isn't giving up, it is stepping up for your own future.